Hey, this is your host, Cyrus Slayman, and welcome to another episode of PM Hub podcast series, where we feature product leaders across the tech industry around the globe. Now, in this episode, we will talk about the Peak Product Manager framework created by Ravi Mehta. Ravi is a consumer technology and product leader who has scaled products that have impacted millions of people and teams to meet the challenge. Most recently, he was the chief product officer at Tinder, where he led the product strategy for the world's #1 monetizing app. Prior to Tinder, he's worked at Facebook and TripAdvisor, and also earlier in his career, Ravi has led a scaling gaming startup called Biximo, which is acquired by Tapjoy, and also founded his own VC-backed fintech startup. And also he was part of the Xbox team, the original team, where he helped define the content and platform strategy for Xbox Live. Ravi holds an MBA from MIT Sloan and a Bachelor of Science in Computer System Engineering from the Boston University. All right, Ravi, welcome to PM Hub.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Sure thing. Well, Ravi, why don't you start by telling us a bit about yourself and how you got into product management?
Yeah, so I've been in product management my entire career. I got started using technology when I was really young. My dad brought home a computer when I was 9 years old, and there wasn't much to do back then other than to learn how to code. So I learned how to code. I started making games in those ways. The way you would distribute your game is you'd release it for shareware and ask for donations. So I did that on America Online and some of the other services that were out back then, and really just fell in love with technology. I went to undergrad for computer engineering. I figured I would either go into hardware engineering or software engineering. But just by happenstance, I started interviewing at Microsoft. And at the time, Microsoft said that they were going to be making a really significant investment into games. And they were looking for people that were passionate about games and had experience with games to come to Microsoft and help with that effort. So I joined Microsoft right after undergrad. And it turned out that effort was Xbox. So I became one of the first 20 or so people on the Xbox team. I spent a lot of time thinking about Xbox Live, which is a really key initiative for Microsoft. One of the reasons that Microsoft got into the console business was because Microsoft really understood the internet and where online connectivity was going, and felt that Microsoft, more than some of the Japanese competitors like Nintendo and Sony, could really help to move the ball forward in terms of online gaming. So it was incredibly fun to be a part of that initiative and to go very quickly from Xbox being a concept to Xbox actually being a device out in the world, being used by millions of people. So I was at Microsoft for about 6 years as a product manager, focused on both the content side and the platform side. And then after about 6 years, I wanted to see what I wanted to do next and thought maybe I should leave the tech industry altogether. So I went to business school. I did a summer of management consulting and worked on a couple of cases that were completely outside of technology, and realized at that point, like, this was, an early love of mine and was going to continue to be something that I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So since then, I've worked in product leadership roles at small startups as well as larger companies. Most recently, I was chief product officer at Tinder, where I was helping the company think about its strategy for Gen Z and what the next generation of online dating will look like. Prior to that, I was at Facebook. I was on a team focused on youth. So we're particularly thinking about how do people 13 to 18 use social media? How is that changing over time? And what can Facebook build in order to make sure that Facebook and its set of products are a great fit for the social needs of teenagers? And before that, I was at TripAdvisor for about 5 years, where I led the consumer product team during a really interesting phase in the company's history where it was newly rolled out from Expedia. And as a result, there were a number of things strategically that TripAdvisor could do that didn't make sense when it was part of the Expedia group. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about how to create a all-in-one travel e-commerce solution. So really thinking about how to turn TripAdvisor into an Amazon for travel, with the ability to purchase travel across hotels, restaurants, and attractions, and build the interface that people could use to more effectively plan their trips. So it's been a really interesting journey. I've really loved building products that millions of people are using and that I use myself, that my family gets value out of. And so That's how I got into product management and why I'm still here.
Now, Ravi, tell us a bit more about the history of Peak Product Manager or the PPM framework.
So I developed the Peak Product Manager framework while I was at TripAdvisor. Right after I had started at TripAdvisor, I started at about the same time as the first year of people that were in an MBA rotational program that TripAdvisor had developed. And the reason the company had developed the program is TripAdvisor knew that it was going to go through a period of growth and wanted to rapidly scale the product team with really great product leaders. But at the time, being located in Boston and as one of the few consumer tech companies in Boston, there just wasn't a large enough pool of qualified consumer tech product leaders within Boston that we could hire in order to meet the needs that we wanted for the team. And so prior to me starting, Adam Medros, the head of product at TripAdvisor, had come up with the idea of recruiting graduates and undergraduates into TripAdvisor with the MBA program in particular. It's a 2-year program where graduates rotate through 4 different 6-month product rotations in different parts of the business. Some might be front end facing, some web facing, some mobile facing, some back end facing. It's a really nice rapid introduction to product management as a career. So in doing that, we were bringing people into the organization that had not had product management experience before, but demonstrated the raw potential to be really great product managers. And one of the things that we thought a lot about was, what are the competencies that are necessary to be an extraordinary product manager and an extraordinary product leader? And as we thought about that, that's something that led to the creation of the Peak Product Manager framework, which is a system of 12 competencies that product managers and product leaders can use to assess themselves, assess the people working on their team, and assess the overall initiatives with the organization or within an organization. The competencies break down into 4 areas. The first one being product execution, which is a set of 3 competencies focused on how product managers define and deliver product. So it's really essentially about launching product. The second area is customer insight. That's a set of 3 competencies specifically focused on how product managers understand what customers want and translate that into really great user experiences. The third set of competencies are in the area of product strategy, and those are really focused on taking really good feature to feature work and weaving that together into a compelling long-term roadmap that helps the product team develop the product with the end goal of achieving business impact for the company and helping the company realize its strategy. And then the fourth area of competency is around influencing people. Product management is unique in that it's a leadership role right from the get-go. So associate product managers are leaders and just as much as chief product officers are leaders. They're just leading in a different way. And so the area of competency around influencing people is focused on the skills that PMs need to lead stakeholders, to lead teams, and to manage up to get the support that they need for their work they're doing. So those 12 competencies all work together. Ultimately, we developed a framework so that it could help us evaluate people internally, put together really great development programs, standardize what we were doing from a recruiting standpoint. And over the years of using it, it became really clear that it was a really nice lens to put on the product organization and help define what traditionally has been a pretty amorphous role.
Wow. That's pretty interesting, and I love how you put this into different quadrants and kind of broke it down, from the 4 cores into 12 competencies. That's crystal clear when you look at the whole kind of big picture of these 4 main areas. Now, Ravi, in the original blog post that you talked about the Peak Product Manager concept, you've mentioned that the PMs are intellectual athletes. Can you elaborate a bit more on this?
Yeah, so when I was at Microsoft, I was there at a really interesting time. Microsoft and Google both really helped to define what product management is. There hadn't traditionally been that role. Early on in tech, there were project managers and software engineers, and Microsoft and a few of the other large tech companies recognized that there was an in-between role that was really essential to helping product teams develop really great software that fulfills the needs that customers have. And a person that I was working with at the time, she led a lot of training in the product management org, said that product managers are like the mortar in a brick wall. Like mortar, they fluidly fill the gaps to make the whole team stronger. And that's really stuck with me all of these years. And I think that highlights a few important things about the product management role. One is that it really is fluid. There's not a very crystal clear definition of what a product manager is, and it can vary from company to company. The second is really successful product managers do whatever it takes in order to deliver great business results for the company, and to make the team as effective as possible. And so the reason I think intellectual athletes are so important, or that term is so important when we think about product managers, is because the best people who are product managers think about themselves not as domain specialists, but as generalists who are able to master a large and interlocking array of skills, and do what it takes in order to deliver what the team needs and what the company needs from the product. And so, in the course of a single day, a product manager can do very many different things, including talking to the engineers, understanding things from a really technical standpoint, talking to customers, looking at data, working with designers on what the user experience looks like. And it's this really interesting role where you combine both left brain activities and right brain activities, and you're doing that context switching constantly. And the people I think that make the best product managers are these intellectual athletes who are able to learn quickly, to fill a bunch of different roles and fill those gaps so that they themselves get stronger as they accrue experience as a product manager, and they make everyone around them stronger through the work that they're doing, and the gaps that they're filling.
Right on. Now, under the product quality assurance competency, which is under the product execution quadrant, Ravi, you mentioned that the quality is the product's most important feature. Why is that?
I think that's a really important thing that a lot of product teams forget. It's hard in the day-to-day of product development to take your eye off of the idea that we just got to add more and more, that we got to make the product better, that we have to fulfill more user needs, add more functionality. But ultimately, especially for products that have product market fit and have already found success, customers come to rely on those products within their daily lives to accomplish the things that those products were meant to do. And in the quest for new features, there's potentially two downsides there. One is that you add things that people don't really need, and you needlessly make the product more complex. The other downside is that over time, in the quest for new features, you don't spend enough time maintaining the core features that are there, and that actually undermines the reason your customers were there in the first place. And so this idea that quality comes first is something that I heard from a friend of mine who used to work at Spotify, and he said this is really core to the way that Spotify approaches product development. They want to make sure that the core experience, the core listening experience on Spotify is as rock solid as possible. And only once you've fulfilled that and fixed all of the bugs related to that core experience can you start to work on new features. And so that I think really highlights a commitment to your customers today rather than your potential new customers tomorrow. That's really important. And you can see that in the Spotify product. I think that's one of the reasons that they have won in what has been a really competitive space. And that's because, I can't recall a time when Spotify got in the way of my listening experience, when the music skipped when I had a decently strong connection, where there were user interface issues, or where something didn't work as intended. All of that has meant that the product experience is really rock solid. As a listener, Spotify consistently delivers, and I can rely on it as a utility in my life, rather than them focusing on the next shiny feature, and delivering an experience that might have all the bells and whistles, but not truly fulfill that core need that I have, which is a solid listening experience.
I love that. Now, now on to the next core competency, Ravi, customer insight. We have, voice of the customer as a competency that you brought up, and you mentioned that the mistake made by a lot of PMs is that they solve for company goals, which is usually easy to understand and track, versus actually user needs, which is quite sometimes hard to understand and measure. Now, how is this related to delivering business outcome that you mentioned as, I think the main goal of a peak product manager?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and this highlights, I think, a core um, tension in the product management role, which is that PMs are both tasked with delivering short-term results as well as delivering long-term value, and sometimes those can appear to be at odds. And so, there might be something that is not the best thing for the customer, but it will generate more revenue, or maybe it'll generate more engagement or retention, and companies ultimately end up making the decision to do those things because it helps them hit the visible measures that they're using to judge the success of the business. But this is a problem that Clayton Christensen, the author of Innovator's Dilemma and Competing Against Luck, has highlighted as a key reason that big companies make themselves exposed to disruption. It's because they start to optimize for themselves, for their internal visible measures, rather than for the needs of their customers. And I think one thing that is very true, although sometimes gets murky as in the complexity of business, is that ultimately business value is tied to customer value. And if you're not making your customers' lives better, at some point that's going to catch up with you from a business standpoint. And we see this today with, there's been tech businesses that have become massively successful that have collapsed in just as quick a time because they started optimizing for metrics that weren't meaningful to customers rather than for the customer experience. I think if we look out in the world, one of the best examples of very customer obsessed company is Amazon. They routinely step away from the thing that might be profit maximizing in this moment so that they can offer a product that feels rich and useful in customers' daily lives. As a recent example, I was watching a movie through Amazon Video, and the movie had a couple of glitches here and there, nothing that we had exception with. But about a day after we watched the movie, I got an email from Amazon saying the video quality of the video you just rented didn't meet our standards. We've refunded you the money. And so we hadn't complained at all. This was a proactive refund that Amazon did. For many companies, it would be unthinkable to give away revenue that they've earned in order to send a signal to a customer that they've done the right thing by them. And so, I think it's really important that product managers understand ultimately what customers want. So customer insights absolutely critical to success as a product manager, and then also have the fortitude to advocate for those customer needs, even in the face of potentially competing needs of the business. And ultimately, the reason for that is not because you don't care about business impact, but because ultimately you do care about business impact. And the best way to impact the business is not to optimize for any of these meaningless measures, but to really to optimize for the value that you're delivering to the customer, because that will always ultimately translate into business impact.
Now, under the user experience design, under the consumer insight core section, Ravi, you mentioned that too often teams conflate visual design and interaction design and also a foreign UI. Now, can you explain why is that the case and also give us an example maybe?
Yeah, I think this is another example of companies optimizing for their own needs or their own goals rather than for the customer. One of the things that I think is great about what's happened in tech over the last like 5 to 7 years is that design has become more to the has sort of risen to the forefront in people's minds of an essential thing to get right about products. But oftentimes when people think about design, they think about form over function. And so aesthetics are something that anyone can see right away. Designers appreciate beautiful things. The people that are seeing UIs appreciate beautiful things. And so internally, companies start to make their UI more and more beautiful. And oftentimes in doing that, that means reducing clutter, using a more limited color palette. Instead of having things appear three-dimensional, having things appear two-dimensional. And all of that organization that ultimately results in an aesthetically really nice product can sometimes sort of gloss over the things that make a product usable. And so I think Amazon is another good example here. Amazon does not build beautiful products, but they build incredibly functional products. And so, no matter where you are on Amazon's site, what are the key buttons that can help you add something to a cart, or they can help you pivot to a product that you might be interested in. And so, I don't think you should optimize for function over form, but you definitely shouldn't optimize for form over function. Ultimately, I think the best user interfaces combine the two so that you have user interfaces that feel thoughtful, well designed, well organized, but also, understand that customers need information to make decisions, and that information, needs to be on the user interface, and that might yield something that feels quote unquote more cluttered than another user interface. I think a classic and maybe trite example of this is gray hyperlinks. So, at some point in the past, I don't remember exactly what it was, people shifted from using blue hyperlinks to more often using gray hyperlinks. And they certainly look better. Like, one of the things that's visually noisy about a page is when you have a bunch of links and they're a different color than the rest of the body of the article. But the problem with going to gray links is that in every test that I've done, and this has been shown in other tests as well, people don't recognize that they're links and they click on them less. And so people are clicking on them 10 to 20% less than if you just use a color and an underline for a link. And so what you've done is you've actually made the content on the site less useful for people, because now you thought that adding a link was useful and that a person would want to have that reference, and few of your customers actually know that that reference is there. So that's a really good example of form over function. In that particular case, the knock-on effect of it from a business impact standpoint is generally not as important. But the same thing has happened with buttons related to revenue and adding to cart. As people have gone to more and more two-dimensional designs and softer designs, the clarity of user interfaces has decreased. The ability for people to really quickly see what are the key calls to actions on the page have decreased. And I think really good product designers and product managers understand the need to both have a beautiful interface as well as have an interface that gives users the support that they need to make the decisions that help them get the most value out of your product.
I love that. Now moving on to the influencing people quadrant, the last one. There's stakeholder management that we have. Now you actually mentioned that stakeholder management is the wrong term. And why is that?
So I think historically we've talked about stakeholder management as a really important part of a product manager's job, and this is the area where leadership really comes into play at the earliest point in their career. So associate product managers and new product managers have to learn how to influence the people on their team to help accomplish the results that they need to accomplish. But I think stakeholder management is really the wrong term. Stakeholders don't want to be managed as much as they want to be included. And so ultimately, the product managers are in this really interesting position and a very enviable position, in the sense that everyone in the company is interested in the product, has a stake in the product, wants to see the product do well for customers, wants to see the product be something that's useful in their lives as well, if it's that type of product. And so when stakeholders have things that they are solving for, those aren't things to be managed or compromised. Those are really interesting perspectives that are more diverse than the product managers or other people on the team, where those perspectives need to be understood, need to be valued, need to be included in the process. As a result of having that diversity of perspectives, product managers will be able to make better decisions. And with those decisions that are made more inclusively, stakeholders will then feel less managed and more included in the product, which makes them not just stakeholders in terms of the product requirements, but stakeholders in the product success. And that's ultimately the thing that I think a product manager can do really well, is make sure that everyone on their team is as committed to the success of the product as they themselves are. And when you do that, you have not just people that are offering diverse opinions that need to be managed, but you have a supportive, high-functioning, aligned team that's all included in the success of the product. And that ultimately is a thing that adds more fuel and more momentum to product development than I think anything else a product manager could do.
Right on. Now, Ravi, we have this Ppm framework, beautiful. There's 4 quadrants, or core that you call them. There's the first 2 top ones are the product execution and customer insight, which are more, I guess, important as a product manager, or like that's the stage you're at. And then moving on to the third and last one on product strategy and influencing people, related to more of a product leader role. Now, crossing this kind of, all these four different quadrants from a product manager to product leader, what are some challenges that you've seen, folks actually face out there?
One of the biggest challenges is, I think, that the role of a PM fundamentally changes as they get higher up within an organization. And so ultimately, a product manager's job is to deliver features, or to build features. A product leader's job is to build features, but also to build teams and also to build companies. And so that shift from, ultimately my success is judged from the features I ship, to ultimately my success is judged based on the systems that I create, the teams that I create, the strategic objectives that I help deliver. That's a pretty fundamental shift in the way that people work. And I think, for product managers that are looking to make that next step into product leadership, it's very important to recognize that is a chasm that has to be crossed, and that it requires a really intentional development of skills and intentionally practicing those new skills. Reforge, who has a series of programs on growth, just announced a product strategy program that they're going to be launching in the fall. And as part of launching that, they released an article about crossing the chasm from a senior PM into a GPM or director. And they talk in really good detail about some of the things that are important for new product leaders to do in order to be successful in the role. Specifically from the perspective of the Peak Product Manager framework, it means spending less time on product execution and customer insight, and spending more time on building up your product strategy skills and building up your skills to influence people in new ways. So PMs, by the time they become product managers, have probably gotten very good at stakeholder management, but they may be managing direct reports for the first time. They may be managing up more than they have in the past. And so those are things that are both really important for them to maintain success. The team leadership piece is really important for a PM to be able to understand how to recruit really great product managers onto their organization, how to coach the PMs that are within their organization, and help them level up in their path to getting to where they want to go from a career perspective. And managing up is really important because ultimately resources in a company flow to the product teams that are most aligned with leadership's objectives. And so there's an interesting dialogue that product leaders need to have with their company leadership team, which is advocating for the things they think are important strategically, as well as understanding what company leadership thinks is important strategically, and making sure that the work that they're doing is well aligned and well communicated within that framework, so that everyone within the organization at the leadership level understands the value that a particular product leader's team is bringing to the table and gives them the resources to accomplish whatever it is they're setting out to do. And then the second piece is really product strategy. And that's a different way of thinking about product work than feature work. It's ultimately about not thinking about a single feature, but thinking about how a set of features are woven together into a cohesive roadmap and a cohesive vision for where the product is going, ultimately with the goal of using the product as a lever to drive forward the company's strategy and deliver business impact. So those are the two areas that I think are really important for people to focus on when they move into product leadership roles: is develop your product strategy skills, really focus on your ability to influence people, and think about that as a much more conscious development process than maybe the path to PM, from PM to senior PM, because of the fact that those skills are pretty different than what a person has done in the past. So the old adage goes, what got you here won't get you there. And that I think is very much true, especially at that particular point within the product career cycle.
No, I love that. So, I mean, the PPM toolkit that we have in place, would it matter if you're a B2B or B2C PM to apply it?
It doesn't matter. So we intentionally developed it with the goal of having it apply to both B2C and B2B PMs. TripAdvisor, where we initially put this into practice, has both. So TripAdvisor has a pretty evolved product for hoteliers and restaurateurs and attraction owners. And we wanted to make sure that the PMs that were focused on those supplier-centric parts of the product could also use this toolkit. Some of the things change. So customer insight is less about understanding consumers and more about understanding the small business owners or other types of customers that you're serving. So some of it needs to be tweaked through the lens of the particular role that you're in, but it should work equally well for both B2B and B2C, as well as more internally focused product managers. If you're a PM that's building tools for your company to be able to operate more efficiently, you can also use this framework with the caveat that you'll think about customer insight in terms of your internal customers rather than through external customers.
Right on. Now, where can our listeners find out more about the PPM framework, Ravi?
Yeah, so I published a series of articles as well as a toolkit, which has all the information about the competencies that I've gone over, as well as some worksheets that you can use to evaluate yourself or to evaluate your teams. I've also got some guidelines on how to put the competencies into practice in terms of hiring or one-on-ones or performance evaluations. All of that content is available on my website. So the website is ravi-mehta.com. So just ravi-mehta.com.
Right on. Thanks, Fred. I've checked that out. It's amazing, the amount of information you put out there. It's a great framework, and I'm a big fan of it personally. So thank you for putting it out there.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on the program. I really enjoyed it.
Sure thing. So what's next with you and I guess your professional career, Rav? You've been all over the place. You've worked for some of the biggest brands out there. Now, what's next?
Yeah, so I'm in the process of thinking through that. I left Tinder in February. My plan was to think about things from a smaller perspective. I've been at big companies for the last couple of opportunities that I've had. I've actually liked going back and forth between small companies and larger companies. It's given me a really interesting, I think, perspective on product management as well as perspective on building products. So I want to do something smaller. I'm in the process of exploring a couple ideas. One we've got in development right now, which tests a couple theses on where I feel social is going for Gen Z. So that's what I'm spending time on right now, and really excited about the where things are going. I know that it's been an incredibly challenging time for people on multiple levels with the global pandemic, and it's been inspiring to see how people have come together, as well as a little bit overwhelming to also see some of the challenges that people are facing, in their daily lives. And so, I think now for the past few months, I've been really focused on writing and helping PMs, particularly helping folks that are going through job transitions. I'm going to shift more time to thinking about what's next and really thinking about how the world has changed as a result of COVID and how we can use technology in a really positive way to bring people further closer together. I think one of the reasons that as a society we've done so well through this change, through the pandemic, is because we have had these technology tools that have brought us closer together, and I'm interested in continuing to build that future.
Right on. That's actually a great segue to my last question. Could be a fun question. I mean, what are some of your quarantine tips, if you'd like to share?
I think most of my quarantine tips have been around our kids. So I have two daughters. I've got an 11-year-old and a 9-year-old. It's been a really interesting process. It's been great to spend more time with them through homeschooling. It's also been a challenging process, as I know a lot of parents can attest to. Their school did a really phenomenal job with homeschooling. I think my biggest tip is to, social distancing doesn't mean that you need to be in the house all day. I think we've seen with the kids as well as ourselves that getting time away from the screen is probably one of the best tips to making quarantine life better. And then the second tip, I think, is around making that screen time as high quality as possible. Our kids in particular have been spending a lot of time on Roblox. And so, not great that they're on a screen, but as a game experience. It's been really fun to see how they've dived into it, how it's helped them stay connected to their friends, and how it's been a really creative platform as well. Roblox has two parts of the experience, one of which is the games that you can play, and the other is Roblox Studio, where you can actually go in and build your own games. And it's a very complex, powerful system, but it's also one that's designed well enough that a 7 or 8 year old can pick it up. So I think those are my two big tips: is make sure you're getting away from your screen, and that you're getting time outside and in the sun. And then, for the time that you are spending in front of the screen, try to make it as social and creative as possible, so that you're using the screen time as a tool to exercise your mind rather than just a tool to consume content.
Right on. Well, thank you so much, Ravi, for being our guest today and talking about the Peak Product Manager. It was a very interesting talk that we had. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. It's been a great conversation.
All right, everyone. I hope you enjoyed today's talk with Ravi Mehta on Peak Product Manager Framework and took some value out of it. Make sure to follow us on Twitter. Our handle is at PMHubTO. And until next time, stay safe and healthy.